Welcome back to Elevating Consciousness. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is Daniel Garner, a writer, philosopher, and one half of OG Rose, the philosophical and literary voice he shares with his wife, Michelle Garner. Their work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, as well as the Uno Press Lab Prize, and has been featured in literary publications such as the Iowa Review, the William and Mary Review, and Broken Pencil. Daniel has been involved in the writing of over a dozen books, including The Conflict of Mind, The Map Is Indestructible, the Belonging Again series, and a creative fiction work, Under the Wing. When not writing or thinking on the deepest questions of our times, he manages the Mead Lake Lodge wedding venue, teaches piano using visuals from the DLG Pattern Method, and raises 4 children. The following conversation was recorded live during Limicon, a digital conference for people in the liminal, Game B, and metamodern adjacent spaces. In it, we explore how we can create belonging beyond conformity or isolationism in a pluralistic and hyper-fragmented world. What belonging asks of us on different scales from local to national to global. Highlight the importance of lack and negativity, which are often overlooked in spiritual spaces. Weak versus costly perennialism, the limits of any one system, model, or medium, and so much more. Enjoy. Daniel Garner, welcome to the show.
Oh, to be here. Thank you for having me. It's a real delight. I appreciate the opportunity greatly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's good to have you here. And I'd love to set some context before we dive in. I've been hearing about your work for a while, and I'm really glad that I'm finally having a chance to engage more deeply with it. I think you're someone who's genuinely grappling with some of the more challenging problems in society. And although we haven't interacted much, I get the impression that you're not just talking about your philosophy, but really attempting to embody it in the way you live. Today, our topic of conversation is belonging in an age of hyper-fragmentation. To begin, I'd love if you could give a short overview of your thesis from the Belonging Again series and how that connects to your larger body of work. I know that there's so much there. So I just, what would be maybe a good way to go into this material?
Oh, well, that's an excellent question. Again, thank you for having me, and wonderful to see everyone here. So I guess, Michelle and I ran an art gallery, venue, and performance place between like 2008, 2014. I suppose the context was one, noticing people first, sensing institutions were failing, looking for community, trying to determine things like identities, words like meaning was going around with Viktor Frankl, drive, Daniel Pink, all, these ideas of the need to think about what kind of matters. There's also, and that's right after the 2008 financial crisis. I remember sitting in a little diner up in Charlottesville when we kind of started hearing about all these things going, So, we're in that and, you're living life and now to jump ahead. Belonging Again came out of, so you're kind of in this atmosphere that's developing over this period of time. And, 2016 hits, obviously there are, Trump gets elected, the world is all of these different things are going on. And my friend Vincent Zimmern gave me a book, who I adore Vincent. It was called Triumph of the Therapeutic by Philip Reif. And it was the first work that I read that really, for me, kind of articulate. A lot of times books you love are ones that that bring into articulation and understanding something you intuit. And so then you're like, there you go. And really, so if I were to say some of the main ideas of Belonging Again, first off, belonging is going to be a state that is going to be a bit distinct from meaning, even though it will include meaning, because it's also going to be taking into account the political, the economic, and the sociological. And if I were to give the main kind of idea that Philip Reif left me with, is the idea that society can be thought of as dealing with two tensions. And of course, whenever you say two, you're in danger. But, we're speaking generally here of givens and releases. And the idea is that human beings, if nothing feels given, they're existentially overwhelmed. And Philip Reif is a famous Freud scholar. He's, civilizations, discontents, et cetera, so forth. And so things have to feel given. So, 200 and so years ago, Christianity, if I just use that example, was not really an option, like a personal preference. It was just kind of given. And the key to something given is it's not really something you think about. It's just kind of axiomatic. You just find yourself always already in it. And this can be existentially stabilizing. But very problematically, givens also reduce freedom because it's given. And so that kind of limits your options and you don't really think beyond them, right? So Philip Reef in The Triumph of the Therapeutic wants to say that the West was being increasingly characterized by a dominance of releases, which is releases from givens. Now, the language Philip Reef uses is actually constraint. And I think I actually wish he would have used givens instead of constraints, because I think it's actually true to life that we experience these sociological forces as given, not really just the way of things, more so than these active constraints. Once they become constraints, we're actually already in the mode of thinking in terms of releases. And so he was saying that more and more in the name of freedom, in the more of individuality, equality, and et cetera, so forth, we were being released from our givens, which is, here's what's very critical. This is a true increase of freedom. And even it's a true ethical advancement because, the individual is not oppressed so much. But here's the problem. The more and more the individual is freed from givens, the more and more everything in their life has to be something they choose or something that they select. And here's the problem. If I choose something, it doesn't feel as authoritative. It doesn't feel as necessarily the case. It feels more contingent. So then very problematically, it lacks the ability to ground me so much or to existentially stabilize me. I'm free, but now I have this problem of feeling kind of lost in that freedom. And the point that he was giving rise to is that when you remove all givens to free people, you ironically create an existential anxiety that makes strongmen appealing, totalitarianism appealing, isolationism appealing, precisely to restore that feeling of givens. And he's really predicting the rise. He's kind of warning that in the name of freedom, we're creating the conditions of bringing out basically Hitler, the gulags, the totalitarianism, and things like that, right? And he's saying this isn't going to end well. However, what the book wants to say, though, is that the conditions of givens is actually also the condition of what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. And that if you don't remove given, and what that is, the banality of evil for her should not be thought of as the boredom of evil or something like that. It's more like the everydayness of evil. And it's just, evil is just what one does. So, for example, it becomes givens that whites are better than blacks, or given that men are better than females, etc. And we don't question it, right? So here's the problem. Givens, which create existential stability that keep us from being overwhelmed by freedom and making our lives feel substantive and authoritative, are also the very same conditions that generate the banality of evil that lead to such great horrors. So you need to break up those givens and free us. But then when we're freed, we're existentially overwhelmed, and we're not going to fall into the banality of evil so much, but we can exist in a state where we're so anxious that you turn to strong men and violence in order to regain those givens, right? So this is the problem of belonging again. And then I'll throw it back to you for any thoughts. So I think we're seeing today a lot of temptation to return to belonging. A lot of people are talking about, and there's many conversations online. But the problem is, if you return to belonging in the traditional way, you're recreating the conditions of the banality of evil again, right? But if you don't return any sort of form of belonging, people are existentially overwhelmed by freedom. And that leads to, the rise of popularism and a lot of the things that we're seeing in the world today. So we have a very severe problem. Now, the book is going to talk about people like Nietzsche, Hegel, Deleuze individuals, all these different ways of return to religion, different forms of religion, all these different issues that we need to take very seriously. And I think a lot of people online are trying to think the issue of belonging again, but not in a regressive way. Can you belong in non-belonging? Can you belong in being nomadic? Can you belong in finding your tribe, or so, et cetera, so forth? Everyone is kind of thinking these issues. And I suppose the last thing I'll say is that I do make distinctions, not that I have anything wrong with the dialogue on meaning and finding meaning. There is, though, a difference between meaning and belonging. Because let's say, for example, I find, talking with you, find people meaningful, or reading Hegel or something like that, right? Well, I can find that really meaningful, and everyone in my immediate community may think I'm crazy. My meaning may actually make me more isolated and less intelligible to the feeling around me. So actually, I can feel less belonging as I gain more meaning. So the question becomes, how do you get meaning and belonging? Not just meaning, but that means you have to get a meaning that also is social. and something that can be intelligible to other people, which then gets into things like economic education and stuff like that. I'll pause there. I will say the book is certainly inspired by Reef. I think there are a number of sociologists like Peter Berger, Hunter, I can go on, that are very, very important for our moment. And the book is, the part one is trying to explain the situation in light of their work, notably. And then the address starts going into things like, well, what do we do about it?
Beautiful. Thank you. I think that's a great intro, and there's a lot there for us to kind of unpack. And just even the notion of belonging and meaning being different, I think that's really fascinating. I could definitely track that in my own life, right? Like finding meaning in a lot of the stuff in the liminal web, and then not having that necessarily translate with people in my own life, and different experiences, like using psychedelics, meditating, different things you can do that give access to different experiences that other people maybe haven't had, and then it actually it almost like undercuts belonging in that way. Another thing that was coming up, I just saw the Manosphere documentary, and and it basically, it's like following these like toxic masculinity type influencers that have become really popular these days. And I think that really speaks to this dynamic you're talking about, of how we had the order, right? The givens, the order, and then you start having way more freedom and kind of more open-ended. Things become more open-ended, and people don't necessarily know, they don't have a sense of structure. And you see this especially with young men that don't have a father figure in the household, right? It's like they're in this chaotic world. It's like, how do I make decisions? What do I follow? What do I do? So when you get these kind of figures that are very like confident, very sharp, very like, this is what you do, it becomes a very kind of easy pathway for them to follow, to maybe get meaning and belonging. And so that was just something that I see that's kind of a big conversation that's, I think you're encapsulating very well in this dynamic.
Well, and the other issue is, I'm of the opinion that people are going to get their belonging, dang it, one way or the other. And if we don't think this problem, they're going to get it in ways that are returning to the condition. And I think we're seeing that. Like when you mentioned the manosphere, you're seeing people that are, one has to be careful to, they're, tribalism, people will talk about return to religion, et cetera, so forth. People, belonging is a state that, this is a kind of psychoanalytical term, kind of quilts the psyche, if you will. Like if we don't have belonging, we don't feel quilted together, right? So we're looking for a way to quilt ourselves together. Now, another way you can do it, certainly there are forms of isolation that people look for. I think it's not by chance. I'm always very interested by the spread of hikimorism. People associate that with Japan. I think that is a very real response to the sociological condition people are in, where basically you, in a sense, give up on belonging and learn to just be define belonging in yourself, et cetera, so forth, or abandoning the project of the social. But then you have people who are not abandoning the project of the social, that are forming into regressive forms. A way to sum up the work is that basically the question is, can you find belonging again that takes global pluralism seriously? That actually finds belonging with difference. We've never, to say something very large, we've never done this. The closest we've done is coordinated difference across markets, capital, et cetera, so forth. You can talk about religions across nations, but they tend to have shared dogma, and et cetera. But the issue that we have now is, what would it mean to actually maintain belonging in the conditions of global pluralism without a strong man, without something regressive? And I think this is an extremely serious problem. And if we can't think it or even know how to begin approaching it, people are going to get their belonging, and what they're going to do is fall back onto previous forms that then they'll fight to the death for, because they finally have belonging. They're not going to give that up easily, and that's a very significant challenge. Another way to put this is, I felt in 2016 that I would listen to people, and I'm in America, I'm in Virginia. So there'd be people who you could call liberal, who I thought had extremely good points. I was reading, Charles W. Mills on Blackness Visible, some of the notions of minorities, et cetera, Lisa Wolfwerk at UVA. But then I was reading people who would be more conservative, like Philip Reef and, Hunter and so on. I was like, they have really good points. Oh, both sides have really, really good points. Oh, well, we have to think them together. Well, how do we do that? Because the other issue, too, is when I'm reading a Charles W. Mills, which you can also associate with Foucault and different people, a way that they're pointing out is that, the givens I was talking about, we can associate givens with norms. Foucault talking about norms and things, right? So givens create the conditions of which the people can feel belonging, but that necessarily creates exclusion and marginalization, right? But then in order to let the minorities into the givens, you have to weaken the givens, which then letting them in removes the conditions necessary for creating belonging. So then you're in trouble. So we have not figured out a way to create conditions for belonging that does not exclude, that doesn't have people on the outside. But how do you not have exclusion on the outside and have something given unless that given is totalitarian, enforcing everyone to think the same way, right? That seems impossible. Well, this is the fun. So yeah, those are some thoughts.
Yeah. Great. And, I think you speak about a global pluralistic society, and, for thousands of years, we really only experience belonging on a local level. And perhaps this is where belonging is like most visceral and real. But as you mentioned in your work, in today's world, we also have belonging on a national and global level. How do these different levels of belonging impact and interact with each other? And, how is the way that we find and create belonging different at each level?
That's an excellent question. So another great warning of all this, and again, I think this conversation is something that many thinkers in many different ways have been circling. So there's always this risk. Like if we look at someone like Dostoevsky, for example, who warned that, it is very easy to love humanity because you can make them in your own image. Like a lot of the brothers Karamazov is, what does the character say to Father Zosima? Zosima, I came to love humanity and lost the ability to love an individual. A lot of Dostoevsky is extremely concerned with how the love of humanity actually destroys our ability to love particular people, because particular people are the ones who smell, right? They're the ones who are annoying. But humanity, oh man, I can save humanity. So one of the great problems is there's a tendency to, as you go from the local to the general to the global, you more and more actually just love a humanity that makes you the savior and becomes a force of destruction. Well, doesn't that mean we're doomed then? There's no possible way to deal with the problem of global pluralism. So first off, typically in history, and forgive me if I say some extremely large claims that would need like hundreds of pages to justify. Hopefully the books accomplish this. Hopefully you can tell me if they do or don't. But typically, history has not been a story where we've done a very good job of negotiating the different levels between the local and the state and the global, because either as you move to the global, you get the you get the sort of sense that you're smarter than all those hillbillies and you know what they need. So you'll do that central planning to control them and make them better. Or as you go to the local, you say, well, we're better than those other guys over in the north, or whatever. And then you get that sort of territorialism, right? It has been remarkably difficult for people to negotiate those different levels. Now, one of the things I want to say is we haven't had the social coordination infrastructure by which we can do it well, which is where I'm really bullish on this technology we're using right here that's combining YouTube, Zoom, recording, and really lowering the logistical requirements by which people can interact who are very diverse. Now, that's a very large topic. But typically, the entire debate between the different levels of the stack have generated things like the American Civil War. It has just generated the literature of Dostoevsky. It has generated the us versus them dynamics, which can make people feel like they have belonging through that. We have not negotiated that stack very well. And I think basically many political ideologies, if you want to use that phrase, have been different ways of approaching the problem that some have emphasized the givens at the expense of the releases, while others have emphasized the releases at the expense of the givens. And you have to have both. You have to have not a middle between them, but a fitting mean, as Aristotle would say. But I would argue we haven't had the social infrastructure by which we could realize that, because that requires this very technology right here is the thing I keep saying. So history is a story of not doing a really good job of that. And part of the work now is figuring out how to do it better, I believe.
Yeah, when you say we need to have givens and releases simultaneously, is it like a self-iterating process? It's like these are our kind of norms, but we're allowing them to transform. We're allowing them to change as we change and we transform because we're living organisms and we're a living system. So there's this kind of movement. But I'm wondering what you imagine that would look like. I think another thing that comes up is, a lot of what you're speaking about, and this is like the central political tension, right? This central kind of polarity, and you see, I really don't like the whole left and right and conservative and I think it's very limiting. But just if we were to speak in that terms, you have, more of the people trying to kind of change what was in the past, kind of the more progressive liberal, like, oh, we need to change. We need to kind of break the structure down, create something new. And then the conservative perspectives, no, we need to go back to that structure. We need to have this. And it's like this, it's not a problem to solve. It's not really like a problem to solve. It's more like a polarity to manage. And how are we managing that polarity? Because we're never going to solve it. And we need that kind of tension, right? We need that tension. But it's like, what would a more healthy version of that look like?
Yeah, that was a great question. So first off, yes, we need something like that. But the problem is, so there's two things. Have there been in history given individuals here and there who have been capable of doing that? Sure. That's not the issue. So the issue is not that, is that something that people can do? The problem is there's never been a critical mass or a majority of people. And also, it really depends on how you're flexible. So if you're flexible in a sense where you say something like, all religions are the same, the other religions are not going to like that because they don't feel like they're all the same. And that doesn't tell us anything, right? So if you're going to be flexible, it's going to have to be from within the internal consistency of beliefs in which you find a point of what makes that justified without overriding or dulling down or watering down the beliefs themselves. Now, that was a very large thing I just said that gets into the whole map is indestructible thing. But you know how in history there's been like perennialism and the idea that everyone's getting at the truth. So there's a cheap perennialism and a costly perennialism. Cheap is when you just assert it. Everything is the same, et cetera, so forth. That ain't going to work. We tried that. It doesn't work really well. People don't like that because it also is not enough to be given to stabilize the person. Costly perennialism means you have to go into each and every worldview and find a way to make space for otherness of which doesn't deconstruct that worldview. But that's like a new Manhattan Project we basically need now. We need like the equivalent of a Manhattan Project to go into every single worldview to see the possibility of a costly perennialism at what I like to call the girdle point, the point of incompleteness that unveils the map isn't the territory. It's one thing, though, to say the map isn't the territory and to assert it. It's an entirely another thing to go into the depths of Christianity and figure out in the precise ways the map isn't the territory, thereby making space for other ways of thinking, et cetera, so forth. That is a Manhattan Project level of work we need to do right now if we're going to take all of this very seriously, in my opinion. So that flexibility of the person is extremely, extremely important. But you see, who decides what constitutes the right level of flexibility? And what way? If you do it ahead of time, that could be kind of planning and not make space for the other person. So it has to be live and in the interacting of the other person. And it's very, very difficult. And the givenness is going to have to come out of that raw encounter itself. Now, a few more things, because so on this, you're right. The left and right has been fairly useless. I always like how Leopard Co. says we also need to talk about up and down, because he makes the point that it's not merely left and right. It's also how big it is, how large it is. He has a lovely book called The Breakdown of Nations. But you see, basically what the conservative, if we use that language, the conservative says that humans need tradition, humans need community, and et cetera, so forth. What Philip Reef wants to say is the reason they need that is because they literally can't ground themselves. They can't define themselves. The psyche can't hold itself together. Really, it gets overwhelmed. Are there some random individuals, perhaps in this very call, of whom actually find a belonging in that state of non-belonging and achieve a kind of being of which can handle that? Yeah, of course. But certainly that is not something we have learned to spread versus scale to create the conditions in the society by which that can be. I think it's at this point fairly random, not random for the individuals who did the particular work, but random in the sense of who's going to be what, right? But the conservatives like you have to have that grounding, but then the liberal says, but that very grounding is what creates oppression. Oh, and they're both right. Oh, shoot. And Wittgenstein made the point too where he said, because you're talking about that flexibility, right? You got to have that flexibility. So Wittgenstein has this lovely line where he says to try to repair a tradition, which we can associate with Gibbons, is like trying to repair a spider web with your bare hands. I love that line, right? I'll throw it back to you in a moment. So what he's getting at is that flexibility you're talking about, if it's done wrong, destroys the Gibbons, destroys the traditions of which are needed to hold the psyche together. And psyche is, a loaded word, but to hold the subject together. And if you mess, it's like breaking a spider web and then having to put it back together with your bare hands, which of course he's suggesting is impossible. So the stakes are very high. But if you don't take the risk, then you're creating the conditions of oppression that keep out minorities, that keep out other perspectives, that lead to totalitarianism. So here's our problem. The conservative stress of Gibbons can lead to a form of the banality of evil and totalitarianism. But to remove Gibbons then leads to an existential anxiety of which can make people want to return to totalitarianism. And you can also see forms of what Leo Strauss called the kind of German nihilism, which is this thymotic expression of a desire to get back to something that has roots and grounding. Well, that can be a return of violence in a different form. So it's a real pickle. But I do think there are steps that can be taken and are being taken by which to address the problem.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think the cheap perennialism, that's something I'm definitely interested in. And I've been talking about this notion of a translineage spirituality. And it's not a cheap perennialism, which kind of just says all religions are the same. It's more of like, oh, actually all religions are unique. And it's like none of them can contain in themselves ultimate truth, but they have different ways of pointing to it. And actually there's a deep, a necessary need for deeply grappling with traditions. And, it could probably take a lifetime to, go really deep into even one tradition, but just having people that are going deep in traditions and being in dialogue feels like a really necessary thing for me. And, also when you were speaking, I was thinking about communitas and, this one way of understanding that is it's this kind of deep connection that people can have in this kind of liminal transformative space where there's a kind of a collapse of identity, but there's actually belonging in that, right? It's this belonging in this transitory space. And, it's just like you said, it's like, that's not something we've scaled, right? It's something that people experience on a small level, but it's, what might that look like to scale that where people can actually connect, and the fact that, to be able to connect to all of humanity, in that kind of in the fact that we're kind of all changing and that we're all in this kind of, in this unknown, that we're dealing with this unknown mystery here, right? Something else I want to bring in, before I bring it back to you is, which I think is one of the more important threads in your work, is what you refer to as negativity or lack. This notion that reality has an irresolvable dissonance built into it, kind of like a kink in the carpet that you can't ever fully smooth out. Perhaps we could relate this to otherness, or a kind of like radical difference that can never be fully assimilated. And I think in many spiritual communities, this idea isn't taken seriously. Instead, there can be like an implicit view that a deeply harmonious society is possible at all scales, that because people experience deep contentment within a particular community or through personal practice, that same contentment can be extended across all contexts. And, while this vision of an enlightened society can be deeply inspiring, it can also become problematic. It can inadvertently lead people to silo themselves in intentional spaces, without recognizing that, their sense of contentment is actually context dependent. Like, you're in this space and you feel happy and it's all is one and all is bliss, but it's because you're in this context. And then when we leave those spaces and encounter dissonance, they may interpret that as like somehow a personal shortcoming rather than something that's structural or inherent to reality. So the more I sit with this tension, the more it feels paradoxical that actually, if we want deeper levels of connection and wholeness, we must be willing to accept deeper levels of lack and negativity. If we want to experience deeper levels of belonging, we must be willing to accept deeper levels of aloneness. And, I just wonder what comes up for you in this exploration, if there's anything else you can say about lack and negativity and its role in belonging.
Fantastic. There's always a tension. So there's a few things. So the problem of global pluralism, if you will, the encounter of otherness to an extreme degree, because there's always, in a sense, I mean, obviously, even in a Christian society, there's Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, et cetera, so forth, right? So there's the other in a certain sense. But pluralism, as I'm talking about it, is defined by this difference of which doesn't even share first principles, right? Like, not even the first principles, or the first principles almost have nothing to do with your first principles, right? Like, if Vishnu has something to do with Jesus, it's an avatar, but the Christian doesn't even necessarily accept the term avatar or something, right? Like, it's just very, very different. Furthermore, the issue of pluralism, it is not that the world is just finding out that people are different, right? As of 100 or so years ago, the way that Hunter and Berger and all of them kind of put it is, it's one thing to know that there are, people different. I'll just say the Hindu exists, for example, for the Christian. And it's another thing when your neighbor is a Hindu. That's global pluralism. When the people you're bumping into and running into unexpectedly are significantly different from you. That's global pluralism. And the reason why, and this is important, is because you find your deepest existential identity possibly drawn into question at any possible moment. Like, if you get on a plane and go to India, well, you kind of know what you're getting into. And also there's a self-selection going on there automatically. How many people are going to get onto a plane and end up in the Sichuan province or Guanyuan for a month or so, which I was in, and boy, howdy, could I eat that hot pot all the time over in Guanyuan. I loved it. In Chengdu, wonderful place. So how many people are going to do that, right? It's some people. And also, too, for most of history, if you were going to do that, it was probably for economic reasons. So you had the economic exchange would mediate the difference and kind of compress them, because even if I don't understand you, we can kind of, in a sense, share a language through the economic exchange, right? So that would deal with it. But if you're just bumping into the Hindu, you're just bumping into the people that has very different beliefs from you, that's an entirely different matter and can contribute to people not wanting to go outside so much, right? As we were saying with the hikikomori, right? And also it can lead to people, well, like you're saying, like we're pointing to, we see more and more people are moving into communities of political alignment. They're moving into online spaces where they think the same, because that's all avoiding, quote unquote, global pluralism as the bumping up against the other person who is different from you, who draws you existentially into question. Now, the issue of belonging, again, is going to be radically tied to that moment of the bumping into otherness, right? And what happens in that moment. That is a moment of negativity. That is a moment that does not feel good. But that moment of not feeling good is the opportunity as well, because it demands something of you and says, what are you going to do about it, right? So a few things. A lot of times the conversation on transformation, and I also just wanted to agree that a single tradition could take a lifetime to really, really know. Like, if we're going to do the work of costly perennialism, if you will, that I think is at the heart of global pluralism, again, it's going to take basically a Manhattan Project. And I think most intellectual Manhattan projects or work has been done to confirm the internal consistency of a belief system, like atheism, Christianity, or so forth. It's an entirely another matter to have a Manhattan Project where everyone in a given tradition are finding the girdle points, the precise ways where the map are not the territory to make open the other person as justified by the internal consistency of the belief system. That's an entirely different work that we need to do. But the point is this. A lot of times when people talk about transformation, it sounds lovely. Oh man, I'm transformed. I have this inner peace. It's all great and stuff, ecstasy, and so on and so forth. Well, the problem is that actually could just make you really fragile, because you have a lot of confidence that you're enlightened and stuff, and then you bump into the person other who thinks your idea of enlightenment is just not getting a real job and being impractical and not contributing to the community. And they say that to you. And what are you going to do there? That's where we see if transformation occurs. Transformation occurs where your understanding of, where your work of transformation is drawn into question, where your work of transformation is not exactly seen as transformation, right? That is the place of negativity, of a certain lack, also in the sense of I lack the ability to make self-evident to the other person that the way that I've lived my life is meaningful and valuable and something that they should respect, appreciate, and participate in. We can't make it self-evident to other people, especially people who are different from us, that the way we live our life is a way of living, dang it, that can create sign, right? That's a negativity, right? And often what happens in those moments is we withdraw, or we make that person unenlightened or unintelligent, or they don't know what they're talking about. That cannot be the new address. The new address, by new address, I mean a way to have belonging that is not regressive. It must face the negativity. The transformation that we'll often talk about online must start with the encounter of the person at the shopping mall tomorrow when you're getting your groceries or whatever. It must start with the blacksmith, as David Hume would say. It must start with the person you bump into outside, right? Now, there's an art, though, to this. Because if you start talking about Hegel with your neighbor, they'll look at you funny, right? So there's a skill and discernment and emotional regulation and nervous system regulation to know how to interact with people around you in such a manner that begins to suggest a quality and possibility of life and interaction that points toward belonging in a new way, but not so much that it's unintelligible to them or that it's overwhelming or so on and so forth. But that's a work of negativity. That's a work of facing yourself. But this is where also, and then I'll throw it to you, this is where lack is not necessary, it should not be stressed as an entirely negative term. Lack can also be opening. Lack can also be clearing in a Heideggerian sense. Lack can also be the apathetic for the possibility of beauty, but it also can be Lovecraft and reduce you to ash. And the difference on if lack will be Dante's love or Lovecraftian really depends on us and the work that we're going to do in those spaces of facing our own negativity.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that it's not a negative thing. And, in Buddhism, there's the notion of emptiness. And sometimes this is kind of interpreted as just like a nothingness, but actually it's another way to understand it is like that's the possibility. That's the ability, the fact that things are empty. There's ability for things to change and transform. And I think, what you're saying about like religions must grapple with their blind spots and limitations. And I think that's where I struggle to be like, oh, like I can just, like I resonate with Buddhism, like that's the tradition that's kind of resonated with me. But I'm super curious about Christianity as well. And, I would struggle to just be like, okay, like I'm a Buddhist and this is it. Because for me, I see limitations. Like it's a system for a particular result, right? Which is like freedom from suffering, right? But it doesn't address everything in my life. It can't address everything. In a life where you're living in the world and you're dealing with different things and you actually care about systems change or what's happening in society. And I don't think there's any religion or any system, right? Any system that can just kind of chew on all of reality, right? And like be like, this is the answers. And I think a lot of your work also speaks to this. I guess I'll throw one more thing out there, and maybe then we could kind of open the floor and see what others say. But something that you speak about in your work is these different ways or kind of like archetypes that people can lean into as a way to create belonging. And I believe this includes Hegel's absolute knower, the Nietzschean child, the Deleuzian individual, Dostoevsky's Jesus. I don't know if those are correct, but are those the four kind of archetypes? And if so, can you kind of just explain those a bit and like the strengths and weaknesses of these perspectives?
Well, so there's a few things. Obviously I've been mentioning that map isn't the territory phrase, which is a part of this. That phrase comes from or is attributed to Alfred Korbisky, who wrote a really important book called Introduction, Science and Sanity. And one of the things that he was arguing is that actually, if we don't come to terms with the fact that whatever way by which we understand reality is incomplete, it will lead to a spread of mental illness that will be very destructive to society. And he's really working in the tradition of, understanding that the word water isn't wet, which sounds ridiculous, but the point is that it becomes extremely difficult for us to live remembering that our signifiers are not the signified, that the means by which we understand reality is not reality. Now, of course, this leads to the giant question of Kant versus Hegel, as generally understood. Does the phenomenon keep us from the noumenon, or does the phenomenon participate in the noumenal, which would be like an iceberg? Is it a wall that we can't get across, or is it a glacier where we get the tip that is part of the bottom, but is also distinct from it at the same time? And basically, for Korbisky, the stakes are very, very high. And he's writing at the beginning of the 20th century, where he's like, if we don't take this seriously, if we don't actually come to be able to live in a manner that understands our worldviews, our signifiers that may have something to do with what is actually the case, the territory. Our maps have something to do with the territory, or they'd be useless. If we don't come to treat our beliefs in that way, it will create mental illness, and it will be miserable. And I think Philip Reeve, I haven't mentioned Limicon, but all of these people are pointing to that. And that's really, I think, the world we're in right now, right? But here's the issue. If you make people loosen their grasp on their worldview in the wrong way, you fall into pure release that Reef is talking about that doesn't work, that leads to all sorts of chaos and return to totalitarian popularism and all the things that you're seeing, right? So it really matters how you loosen people's grip on their maps, right? And it really matters how they relate to them. They must feel like they're not betraying their beliefs. If you make them feel like they're betraying their beliefs, they will not take that very well. Conyers is like, Charles Taylor and all these people are like, nobody likes being told their story is false. What you have to do is show how their story can be bigger than they thought. So the book is certainly going to be talking about, when we talk about Hegel's absolute knowing, the Deleuzian individual and all that, all of these, and the Nietzschean child, all of these can be seen, because the book will go through the argument of all of the possible addresses of belonging. And what you end up having to find is a form of subjectivity that is able to know their map isn't the territory. And I just keep using that language because it's simplified. They're able to know their map is not the territory, and yet nevertheless treat their map as if it has authority and it's useful, and it gives them some access to the territory they otherwise would not have. Right? That is a very odd mental position. That is a very odd state of the subject to take, but it is necessary for belonging again. Now, the book will also talk about, Philip Reeve had some concerns with archetypes and Jung, and that book is so lovely as well, because he's framing the debate between Freud and Jung as really a sociological debate of the 20th century. And to look at that just for a moment, Freud saw psychoanalysis as a problem for first world nations, because relations were not so much mediated by the need to get clean water or stuff like that. It was face to face. So we were encountering one another directly. And when people face one another directly, it can go poorly. Right. So like learning the art of dealing with difference, the other was a big deal. So Freud was basically like, we're going to free people from ways of avoiding otherness. And that's kind of an increase of freedom that brings various negativities. And Jung basically kind of looked at Freud and was like, what are you making them free for? Like, what are they going to be free for? Right. And Jung, he turns to various archetypes and all these, and this is a generalization. But the great debate becomes that what Reeve sees in Jung is people using archetypes as actually a kind of way to reestablish traditional belonging if you're not careful, because you get an identity of that archetype that keeps you away from otherness, right? But Freud leaves you with a freedom you have no idea what to do with. So what do you do? So we have to have a form of subjectivity that we are trying to strive toward that doesn't pigeonhole us in an archetype that we then find meaning in, but meaning at the expense of belonging, because it's not intelligible to other people. But then that's going to all come to how we can handle the encounter of the other person. So generally, the absolute knower, and then I'll throw it to you, because all of those are very important categories. The absolute knower is someone who has encountered the limits of their knowledge, and that's been positive. They've encountered and realized the map isn't the territory, but they're glad in it. They're glad the map is not the territory. They're glad their worldview actually isn't able to describe everything, because that otherness, it doesn't, is a mystery that increases beauty, excitement, and possibility to them. So basically, the absolute knower, the Deleuzian individual, and obviously these are all different because Deleuze doesn't like Hegel so much. So that, but so there's differences here. But all of them are going to work in a manner that makes the other not unknowable, but an unknown, that thus makes it an adventure. But that requires us to be able to handle the unknown. And that's a lot of the work that needs to be done.
Beautiful. Well, I have many more questions, but perhaps right now is a good time to open the floor. I am curious what's been coming up for everybody else. Do you have whether you have a comment, a question, a reflection? If you have one and you want to be on camera, you could raise your hand. And if you don't want to be, but you just want to put something into, you could put it in the chat box. Just try to make it succinct so it's kind of easy for me to read. I've been seeing there's a lot of comments that's been coming in. There's too many for me to kind of go through all that. But yeah, we'll start with Kevin. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for this talk. I will say that I have difficulty feeling like I belong in this conversation, because I feel like I need some kind of philosophy degree or something to make sense of most of it, where there's actually that kind of a pretty big disconnect for me, where I'm picking up every maybe third or fourth word and not understanding any of the rest. Like, for example, those archetypes, I was really excited. Oh, archetypes. And then I had no clue what you just said. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh. And then there's just this feeling of not belonging generated by this talk. So there's like this irony embedded in there. You were talking about the idea of weirdly enough, I have a lot of confidence in you, Daniel, like from what you're speaking, like what I can get out of it. I'm like, oh, he's onto something juicy here. And then I can't access it. And there's this kind of frustration there for me. That's kind of my take on it. It's like, I guess I got to buy the book so I can more clearly understand what's going on.
Oh, no, that's an excellent comment. I'm glad you said that, Kevin, because, well, it's always like right there. Like, something I appreciate about these talks is precisely then, because you get used to your language game, right? You get used to your way of speaking, but being brought to a place of being like, you're in the language game. How do you bring it down to something that is more open, for example? So, like, a way to put it, for most of history, belonging has been found by, I go outside, and I'll just use the example of Christian because that's the one I've been using. I go outside, I'm a Christian, my neighbor is a Christian, therefore Christianity is not an option. It's just the way of things, because everyone I interact with is Christian. And when I say things like, I don't have to explain to my neighbor what I'm doing on Sunday or what holidays I don't feel like I have to justify myself because they live in a similar way. And that also creates a feeling of what I'm doing must be right. What I'm doing is a good way to do it. It creates what Berger calls a plausibility structure, because everyone is kind of reinforcing one another, right? And that can create great comfort. Now, of course, that also creates the mindless machine where everyone is just assuming what everyone is doing. And in the town down the street that isn't Christian then feels blocked out, right? And interaction with that town is going to be kept to a minimum because they draw into question the entire plausibility structure, the entire social order that people are following like a flock of birds that are all just kind of turning and going together without any direct top-down coordination or anything. And that feels great. It feels great to just be able to kind of go through the world and it all flow and not having to explain yourself so much. You don't have as much existential anxiety. That sort of form of belonging, I believe, is what many, many people in the world today are looking for. They may call it meaning. They may have different languages for it, but they're looking for that ability to feel as if they can just flow, if you will, just kind of go like those birds, right? Global pluralism is a condition where finding that state is harder and harder to find. But people still long for it. And one of the ways that you can get it is by keeping out the other, or keeping out people that draw into question, or to whom you have to explain what you're doing on Sunday or what you're doing with your time, which then, if you have to explain it, makes you doubt it for yourself, or it can, at least. For many people, it tends to, right? So then you're going home at night and going, well, why exactly am I a Christian? Another great example is parenting. You know, if you're around people who all parent similar to you, great. But when you encounter the other who has a different way of parenting, then you're wondering if you're ruining your kids. And then you're existentially overwhelmed and you're anxious and you don't even know. You can also not feel like you belong in your family. You feel off, right? People crave the feeling that they are fitted, that these things are going together. And a way, again, you can do it is by removing difference. Those forms of, that's actually exactly, Kevin. Michelle and I talk about that all the time. We're like, I don't know. That feeling, and the temptation of that feeling is to remove others, to remove diversity, so that everyone around you just affirms you, right? What would it mean? Because when I talk about the absolute no, and there's no need to, like you said, these are phrases. These phrases are pointing to the person and the people of whom can run into people who raise their kids differently, or some homeschool, some do public school, and I'll close with this, and actually still maintain that dance, still maintain that flow. Or if those people are in a different flock of birds, they don't go home at night and feel existentially overwhelmed and unable to, and then they question everything they do and give up, right? They're able to return to their own flock. That's a lot of the work today.
Awesome. Yeah, I see some other hands. I do want to reflect on what Kevin said, because I think that was also a very important comment. And a way that I'm looking at it is like that frustration itself of like not being able to meet what somebody's saying or being able to understand. I feel like that is maybe a way of understanding lack, like that there is a lack there, right? And like whenever there is a thinker or a body of work or something that we want to get into, there is always this kind of gap that we have to transverse and cross before we have enough where it's like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And I think it was the same thing for me approaching Daniel's work. Like, once again, I said before, like, I've been hearing about Daniel and I've been hearing good things about him. And so there was something intuitively that I'm like, okay, like it actually makes sense for me to put the effort into trying to understand what this man is saying, because it might be worth it for me. So I think there's this being able to discern who do we actually, where do we put that work in of trying to understand what somebody else is saying, even if at a certain point it may be beyond us. And then I think the other piece, Daniel, that you talk about, becoming intelligible. And I think this is kind of the challenge for geniuses like yourself and some of the other thinkers that we have in the liminal space that really kind of are pushing thought to its limit. It's like, how do you do that, right? It's like, how do you push complexity of thought and thinking more deeper about things, and at the same time being able to translate that in a way that is intelligible for more people. And once again, I think that's a tension that I don't think that's something you saw, but once again, those are polarities to kind of play with.
I will just say, I know there's more hands. That's huge. Couldn't agree more. I think that also gets into why every articulation can have value. Different articulations matter, and we need an infrastructure that affords different articulations, challenges articulation, creates a multiplicity, which again, I see this social coordination mechanism as part of, right? Couldn't agree more.
Beautiful. Well, Seth, I would love to hear what's coming up for you.
Yeah, thank you. Really enjoying the conversation. I also wanted to resonate with Kevin. And I think when we don't understand, when there's a gap and I don't know, it takes courage to say that out loud. Like, that's already can be difficult for me to do. Like, I don't understand. And it's very easy to assume that everyone else understands. So, there's many levels to this. It's a big tangle. I think, as Daniel's really made clear. But one of the things that I'm hearing is, can I handle the discomfort, right? Which on some level is a nervous system question. Sure, we're going to get into a lot of content, maybe political content or religious content, but whatever it is this person's going to say, if it doesn't land for me initially, can I just hang out and deal with that? So it feels like if I tried to make that simple, a word I would use is courage, like we're talking about courage. And I thought it was interesting, Daniel, that you pointed out, sure, there's individuals out there who are courageous. There's individuals who have bridged the gap, but then you need that critical mass. And I think that's at least the spirit of what we're here doing at Limicon, right? Like this is a gathering of people who maybe in some ways feel like they don't belong, but it's like, hey, can we all come together and feel this belonging together? So I wanted to ask about, and you've mentioned the social coordination mechanism, like just having these conversations, but the question of how this kind of attitude, maybe that's courageous, maybe that really acknowledges the body, how it spreads. There was some mention in the chat of, intentional communities. And some people can go to an intentional community and you have this experience that's really awesome, but then you go home and it's like this jarring experience of, well, this isn't, this, I can't have that feeling anymore because I'm not on retreat. You also mentioned the arts gallery that you hosted, and I've heard a little bit about that before, but it's a concrete, real world example. But acknowledging that none of this is simple, I wonder, how do you see a sort of a success story of or maybe something like Limicon, how actually it spreads, and just one other thing that I'm thinking is probably key to this, that I just want to mention, is like the relationship between the online spaces and, the blacksmith, the person that I encounter who's not in a Zoom square. They're actually a breathing 3-dimensional human who I can reach out and touch. So I just wanted to, invite you to paint a little picture how you see this perspective spreading in a way that could actually maybe work. Thanks.
No, that's an excellent question, Seth. And if it's starting to get windy, if the internet starts to go bad, tell me and I'll jump to this other network here. So I think I'm okay, but we live here on a farm in Virginia and weather is a constant adversary. So it makes it fun. So outstanding. So first off, the very, like you said, I very much appreciate Kevin saying something. Like that entire problem of the language, the lack of intelligibility, is one reason why the address cannot be a set of ideas that if everyone has, we're good to go, right? Like it can't be, here's a system, and if everyone follows it, great, right? What ultimately, in my opinion, is needed is basically an infrastructure that increases the range of interactions that are logistically less difficult for people to engage in, that can, without any preset outcome, something like Dave Snowden will emphasize, who I really appreciate, can actually give form to different subjectivities or different ways of engagement. So a major argument of the book is that what we have today, so Friedrich Hayek, who's a famous economist, argues for the pricing mechanism as basically enabling the distribution of resources in a manner where you don't need top-down control, right? So an example is if water is $8 in New York, all the water will be shipped up there because there's profit. And as all the water goes down, the price goes down, right? And then so the shipping will follow the price mechanism. So you get this way of coordinating resources very, very effectively. Now, are there problems with it? That's a different question. But the point is that that's what Hayek is saying. So we have a world that has a pricing mechanism that is really, really good at coordinating resources, but we don't have a mechanism that is very good at coordinating subjectivity or interactions, right? But now we do, because we have what I like to call the social coordination mechanism, which is this YouTube, Zoom combo that we have, where on this fine Saturday day, without leaving my house, I have the ability of interacting with people all around the world who are making me realize things that I've never thought before, or interactions like this ability, and we can all come together. And I've got my son's birthday party is this evening, and I'm able to do that without a plane, and it's not expensive. And this ability to access the social of which then I can carry to my in real life interactions. And then we can meet in real life because of these sort of things. This is a movement of persons that was not possible before, that basically without the speed and effectiveness of the movement of capital or commodity was in a sense too fast for subjectivity to keep up and to work with. And this gets me into Solo Residuals, Dietrich McCloskey, and other people like that. So for me, a lot of the work is basically making this technology available to people, making people like modeling it so people see that it's worth doing it, and then they use it in their own way. And they're also more likely to experience conversations like this that otherwise they may never thought about, which then gives them permission to do it themselves and models what it can look like. Because I'm of the opinion, I've never met a person. So I'm very bullish, and I won't keep going. And you've asked about Eunoia as well, which is important. A lot of how we relate is tied to communication. I don't want to, I did sign language for a long time, so I don't want to just say verbal language, but basically how we interact with one another. And I have never met a person who can't talk for hours about something. It may not be philosophy. It may be their job. It may be flowers. It may be, the what they do at work or football or something like that. Like when I'm unloading trucks at the wholesale long ago, they could have talked about Duke basketball all day long, right? People long for that experience of losing track of time and getting really excited about something, right? It's just really hard to find those people of whom you can have that lost experience of time with about your something, right? That can create an experience of belonging, right? Well, hey, I can now find all these people that want to talk about this kind of stuff, which would be really hard to find if I didn't have this technology before, right? And that creates an effect on subjectivity. That creates a form of connection. And then there are just issues of the school system moving from a trivia-based education, question and answers, to oral education, to interactions, so on and so forth. I see a lot of the address of the current political, social tensions we see in the world as following from a lack of an infrastructure that enables the movement and interaction of the social by new qualities and new ways, of which we don't need to, which is not for us to determine the outcome of, but by increasing the effectiveness of that social interaction coordination, then I think it becomes possible to form subjects, not according to ideas, but by the encounter, the raw encounter itself of the otherness of the blacksmith, to actually make us be able to handle existential tensions that otherwise may tempt us with hikikomoriism or popularism or things like that. I'm happy to say more on Eunoia, but I'll pause on that. I should talk more about that. So that was a wonderful, wonderful experience over many, many years.
Beautiful. Well, Ardell, would you like to unmute and share what's moving through you?
Sure. So global pluralism is an idea that's still embraced by a tremendous portion of the Western world. And the perennial philosophy seemed to be a meeting point. The tensions you described, some of the prior points relate to me, remind me of the author David Goodhart, Somewheres and Anywheres. And I've been hearing a lot of commentators expressing that when the left started to get so censorious, so rejecting of everyone who seemed to be engaging in wrongthink, then these were it was jarring to those who are the somewheres, the people who felt rooted in place and, not the, say, intellectual elite. And they felt so disrespected. I personally know people who, are in the class of people that would be called racist when I know that they are not racist. But they just kind of lumped into this, oh, you're white males engaged in wrongthink. Thanks.
I have not heard of the language of somewheres and anywheres. I love that, Artem. Thank you for that. That's really, really great. And a way to look at what Philip Reeve is saying is that somewheres are kind of particularized based on givens, where the anywhere, if I'm understanding that language correctly, and I may not be, where the anywhere has release and they're able to move, right? I think a lot of the conversation on races, et cetera, so forth, has been actually at ground zero of this problem, of the identification that there is something problematic about somewhereness that excludes, but then the people in the right, I can go into Foucault, Charles W. Mills. I think Mills's book, Blackness Visible, is a masterpiece. Jamaican philosopher, brilliant man. And so that critique of the somewheres is correct, but then the somewheres have critiqued the anywheres and been like, well, this actually destroys belonging or it creates transience. There's a European philosopher, I can't remember his name. It may have been a Gumday, I'm not sure. He points out that most of the anywheres are actually the new barbarians, which is that they kind of travel to these different countries, have these experiences, they collect these experiences and go on, but they don't ground themselves in the new communities. They don't live with these people. They just treat them as commodity forms. It's a kind of new barbaricism. Like if you don't, like it's like Snowden talks about, I think, appropriation, right? Like without somewhereness, it's inevitable you engage in some sort of appropriation if you're not careful, right? But if you're doing somewhereness, you're not perhaps even interacting with other people, right? So what do? That is the $1 million tension that I think in many respects is at the ground zero of the political problem today, that we're still in a sense using 20th century, I want to say thinking, that may be too much, 20th century thinking by which to approach. And so it's not necessarily helpful. But I love that language of somewhere and anywhere. Thank you so much, Ardell. I really like that.
Yeah, glad you're coming away with something here too, Daniel. Roger, what's up?
Yeah, I was thinking about the new medium, the new media, which is the ability for people to actually communicate with each other rather than get stuck in the kind of push media where you have, if you look at the evolution of media from print all the way through radio, television, then you had cable, now you have internet. It's giving more voices an opportunity to speak. I've been doing some facilitating over the past couple of years using this medium. And one of the things that I think really helps people is when they're acknowledged and where they're given an opportunity to speak. I think that a lot more comes out of conversation where you actually have people asking questions and really developing the flow together, in a cooperative way versus, the old-fashioned newsreader, or even today we have influencers who dominate the conversation and give very little opportunity for interaction from their audience. So I think that we are moving into that kind of a sphere, and I think what it'll mean is it's going to give more people an opportunity to feel like they have agency, that they actually have something to say and to contribute, and it's going to move us away from the demagoguery of having leaders who are more or less pronouncing what the agenda is, and then everybody having to follow it. So what I see is a more a greater degree of pluralism, a greater degree of diversity in terms of thought, and also a kind of an elevation of individuals into the space where they are co-creators of the story rather than just listeners or audiences. So that's my hopeful thought at this moment. I'm hoping to see that continue to evolve.
Couldn't agree more. That was very well said, Roger. As a very quick point, I think what we're doing here is not the same as podcasts, basically. I think podcasts kind of tilled the soil of this kind of interaction, but it is different because you have this more pluralistic use of the medium. And, Walter Ong, Marshall McLuhan, I like to make a distinction between the material condition and the medium condition. Kind of Marx's Frankfurt Scholar emphasizes the material condition. I think the big factor in history is the medium condition, because the medium forms subjectivity, like Walter Ong being like the scientific treatise is not even possible until after the printing of the book, because it frees up the mind to think in new ways. This use of a medium as a medium condition forms subjectivity. My giant claim that has to be justified is that it forms us as subjects in a way that makes global pluralism possible. And until this medium, we couldn't be formed as subjects to be able to handle it and deal with it. Because like you're saying, we feel like we can be part of the conversation. Oh, so I can be part of global pluralism, not just have people on TV tell me I ought to be pluralistic. Oh, I can be heard by global pluralism, not just be told I should put myself in its midst, right? You can actually experience it. And actually, yeah, it can be nerve-wracking and require courage, but once you're in it, you can experience it, then you can be glad in it. But when you're just being told about it by the TV or people in power, you can't have that experience. So I'm extremely bullish on the medium condition that is this social coordination mechanism. Really appreciate what you said, Roger.
Yeah, I want to reflect on that too, Roger. I think that for me, you know, we could see the podcast as like an advancement of like typical programs on TV, but you know, I've been creating the podcast now for over 4 years, and this year I'm really trying to move more into these kind of sessions where we're dialoguing and other people are also voicing what they're saying. To me, it seems like the natural progression into you know, grappling with truth and these kind of things. I think there's something that's more limited when there's a one-on-one dialogue and it becomes this kind of like expert speaking down to you, where it's very different when we're here as a group and we're all able to interact and bring our experiences in. I think that's a lot, like Roger said, I think that's a lot more connective and meaningful for people. So that's definitely something I'm trying to lean into more this year. And yeah, Kevin, welcome back again.
There's something that Ardell said that really felt like it was emblematic of something you're talking about. And she was talking about that friend of hers who, as a white male, is feeling like he's being accused of being a racist, even though she knows he's not. And I think that, like, so this is now we're slipping into my profession. I do justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So I think one of the things that happens is that racism is considered an insult instead of an analysis. Right? It's structural, right? Like even in what she said about him being a white male, the entire given of whiteness is racism, right? It's not, we're not saying European, we're not saying Polish, we're not saying English as a distinction. The distinction is whiteness. And that whiteness developed in a very specific context of chattel slavery. So the inherentness within the identity of whiteness is racism, is harm, are these things. And what I've noticed in doing the work that I've done is that there's very often this reaction to just the information, like just the pure information, where people suddenly feel that those givens threatened, right? And that what they react with is a doubling down on the harm. And what I found actually, which I think reinforces something that you're saying, is that if I do my work from the perspective of relationality, from the perspective of relational skills, when I do the work through, I can leave out all of the information. And if I just focus on consent, boundaries, how do we navigate boundaries, and repairing ruptures in relationships, I get people who can actually cling to something. Because when the information is presented that, hey, look at this history of harm and where this has come from, people immediately feel that threat to that given that they've grown up with. And their reaction isn't logical. These are good people who have this reaction, right? And good people who cause tremendous harm in that reaction, not realizing that what they're actually doing is somebody saying, hey, don't hurt me, and they're hurting them in response. So it's just really interesting that it kind of fits into what you're saying, where it does become something intensely subjective, and you have to you can't hand people the information and say like, here, now go do something with the fact that I think you're a racist, right? You have to actually hand them something of, hey, if you learned about consent, boundaries, and repair, it wouldn't matter how you react because you'd be able to navigate any mistake you ever make.
This is an extremely important point. So again, if I just reference like Charles W. Mills, who certainly is speaking to this issue of equity justice that you're speaking to, is that racism is an identification. For me, racism, following his work and Woolfark and others, is precisely an identification of this problem of the relationship between givens and releases. Is that, and what is being talked about in what is being talked about in this psychosocial, this Philip brief. I'll slow down. It's just such an important point. What they are identifying is what the tension between givens and releases is the essential problem that is being manifested in many different political conversations that seem different, but at the heart of it are actually dealing with this problem that we haven't figured out how to deal with. And I would argue one of the reasons is because we haven't had the social infrastructure by which we can deal with it, right? Because like you're saying, if I say, because when we say racism is structural, the issue is that racism is givens that create identity that existentially stabilize people, but they do so by necessarily excluding. Which then, if the white person, for example, is say, well, don't take away my identity, that just creates anxiety, then the minority says, well, we have to live with that anxiety all the time. And that's the issue, because you're released. You don't have givens. So you're existentially overwhelmed. You cannot form belonging. What Philip Reeve is pointing out, though, is that so basically for all of human history, belonging has been based on givens, which means there must be some form of structural racism somewhere, some form of structural exclusion somewhere. So the problem is humans don't require belonging, which means we're set up to keep repeating racism, xenophobia, and other forms time and time and time again, unless we change the medium condition that allows people to, like you're saying, interact. Not to be told they're a racist, but interact in spaces like this with minorities, with other people, by which they can actually gradually work through dissolving away from an identity based on givenness to an identity based on the betweenness, an identity based on the interaction. That is the work we need to do. That has to be done with a new structure, a new social coordination mechanism, not simply a message. Everything Charles W. Mills and many people in Foucault, everything they're saying is 100% correct, but everything to circle that, there's only one way to circle that square. It's a new medium condition which brings people into interaction differently. I see no other way to do it, because otherwise it's just ideas, and people don't respond well to ideas. You're a racist. Well, screw you. I was like, well, you're a racist because it's structural, so let's enter into a new structure. That's ultimately the issue. If racism is structural, then you need a new structure, and the only new structure that would deal with it is the social coordination mechanism. Nothing else can do. And otherwise, we're just going to keep getting new forms of racism, new forms of xenophobia, new forms of national over and over again until we kill each other. I would like to see us not kill each other. So I think this work matters, and I'm glad everyone's here. Thank you for what you shared, Kevin.
Could I just kind of say something back just quickly? We actually experienced this in some gatherings that I was doing, where we had done this really big gathering, and it was over 5 days, and it was a very diverse group at the beginning, right? It was intentionally made very, very diverse. But by the end of it, there were more white dudes named Mike than all marginalized people. And everybody who was present, all of those white dudes named Mike, lovely people, well-meaning, amazing people. It was ambient. So we did an experiment in another local context where we went with lived experience people, right? Trying to how can we fix this? What did we end up with? No white dudes. So we ended up creating this other exclusion. And it was sort of unintentional, but it came about by this reactivity to exclusion. And then we, like you're saying, we recreated the exclusion, right? Where now we didn't have that voice in the room at all. And now we still have an incomplete picture. So I just wanted to share that example of exactly what you're talking about.
That is beautifully said. And for me, again, racism is structural. Xenophobia, all these things are structural. So much of the conversations about these structural problems, well, then the name of the game is new structures. And we need an infrastructure by which we make new structures. This is that infrastructure. That is what we are doing, because you are changing, because otherwise you're just caught in the back and forth. Like you're saying, you make something and then it excludes you. That's the dialectic that you get stuck in forever, that Hegel's warning about, without going into. You just get, that's where we are. We're just stuck going back and forth. Well, the structure we have from the 20th century necessitates that ever back and forth. So we need a new structure. And this is what the technology allows. But it's but we just have to do the faithful presence and commitment to it. But thank you so much, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin, for bringing that up. I just want to check with you, Daniel. I believe you still have a little more time. I just wanted to check that you're good on time because we have a couple of...
Absolutely. On here is so wonderful.
Yeah. I am really enjoying this conversation, and I'm, like as much as I love one-on-one podcasts, there's just so much more richness when you get other perspectives because there's things that get brought in that I would have never brought in. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this. And Sigurd, I would love to hear what's moving through you.
So my pondering has to do with where the natural world is in all of this, because if that's the given, if that's the infrastructure, and the individual sense of belonging is a deep personal connection with that world, then there is a space for great diversity because each person is going to have a very different sense of their own personal connection. And there's going to be an openness to recognizing that there are going to be great differences. A great problem comes in with someone with a conqueror mentality comes in and completely disparages any possibility of that connection with the world. And then there is a gap that's pretty hard to cross. That's it.
I completely agree. What we are doing for me right now is using technology in a more, I want to use a term from a man called Deleuze. It's rhizomatic or like mushrooms with the roots under the ground connecting. For most of history, we've only had a coordinating mechanism that was very vertical. That was a tower. That was bring everyone to the university, like bring everyone from around the world to the same place. This was a major form of cities. A major focus of universities was bringing everyone together. But the problem with that is that tends to put nature outside the walls, and it tends to also bring people together into the same space, so the same environment, which then I would argue necessarily limits diversity, because diversity is not, you can, if you're all in the same place, versus right now we have people all around the world gathered, that's more diversity you're bringing in different environments, right? So the more we can socially coordinate without bringing everyone together, the more that right there is a multitude of environments and natural and more sustainable and more diverse and different things like that. I honestly think we're going to, it would be a larger subject. We live on a farm. I think, Wendell and all those people I could talk about all day. So I really appreciate what you're saying, is that we now have the ability of people not having to all gather in a city. Not that cities are inherently bad. I don't want to say that. Cities have always, if you go to New York, for example, it's always amazing how New York State is mostly farmland for the city. The city and the farm always kind of go together, right? It's been very easy to lose sight of that due to the way that most social formation has been occurring for most of history. We now have an ability to better remember that, because it can become more horizontal, if you more spread out. It's more like the roots can kind of go out, to keep that in mind. And now people can live closer to nature and feel like they're still part of the conversation and able to engage in cultural development, where it mostly for most of history, it felt like you had to go to the city. People are going to be able to feel like they can actually be in nature, in different environments, part of the world, and still interact with people because of this technology, which I think is better alignment with nature. I think it's going to allow people to be in environments that are more natural. And it's also going to allow people to interact with people they otherwise wouldn't have, and then afterwards go out and take a walk in the woods, which, that might be a hint of what's coming for me. So I appreciate what you were saying there.
One quick follow-up is something that doesn't require the infrastructure of a city is a regular gathering, like an annual elders gathering or Kumbh Mela in India every 4 years, where there's a huge confluence of people who then go out to their lives and then a year or 4 years later come back together.
That's exactly right. And because of this technology, I've had Michelle and I and our family, we've had so many people who we've met and then met in real life. And then we've had gatherings that otherwise would have never occurred. And worse yet, we would have never known that we didn't know they never occurred, right? So, that's, you wouldn't even know what you were missing out on, right? Which would feel like you weren't missing anything, but that would be precisely the problem, right? Like without this technology, we haven't known what we haven't known. And therefore we haven't thought the possibilities, but now we can. So I appreciate what you said.
Yeah, I can be in nature. I can be in the middle of nowhere. And have a conversation that maybe would have been only available in a city center where intellectuals are gathering and having these conversations. Now it's like you could be anywhere and having this kind of depth of conversation. And yeah, I've been, I know several people have came out and met you. You've hosted them at your place. And I think that's wonderful. I'm also over the years, although there hasn't been as many interactions as I wanted, I've also been able to meet a handful of people through online spaces in person. And yeah, that's really fulfilling. And yeah, it's beautiful. Fleur, what's moving through you?
Oh, yes. Fluorine, yes.
Lauren, yeah.
So to build Manhattan project of the ontology, I will call it liminal concord ontology project. So first of all, the Zoom, the current solutions, the platforms we use, we are producing data, but those data are fragmented and collected and owned by different corporations, like social media, Facebook, and X, like whatever text we are producing. Those data we produce, they tell about us. It creates the ontology about us. So yeah, I have created with AI, making it so easy. I have created a platform called Castalia, which you can tag in the chat. It collects, it transcribes and collects about you. It remembers what you are interested in about, what you talk about. I think this is a first step to build some ontological infrastructure. Yeah, that's my share.
I think that's a lovely share. It's interesting you bring that up. I think often about what it will be like in the future, that there will be just hundreds of pictures of me that my children can see, or they'll be able to watch videos on YouTube that I was in, right? That you have this radical digital history that's available to people. And how also that will impact me, knowing that digital history is there. I think a lot of there's a lot of notion that's true that's on the idea that corporations are capturing our data, right? And they're kind of using it and so on and so forth, which is very, very true, of course. But what would it mean to somehow actually use our own data for ourselves to help structure how we are as subjects, right? Like what would it mean for us to use our data, right? And for me, I'll just speak personally, like so much of this space is actually having thoughts I've never had before, having conversations I never thought, like the event horizon, the edge, right? Where I don't know what's going to come up. The key word Bernard and I would always talk about improvisation. You know, improv, we ran that art gallery. Like this space is a very improvisational space. And I think the capacity of improv was extremely important in a data AI capture world. And if I'm blicking out, I could do. I saw I was freezing there. So, but am I back? Nope. Nope. I can start singing until I come back. I knew the way. Oh, I'm unfroze. So I was just singing there and I wasn't even froze. So fantastic. Oh, great. So just if it stops, I'll switch. But okay. Anyway, now I'm just doing it even though I know I'm not froze. But anyway, is that improvisation in a world where all your data is captured is really important because you keep making a new edge that hasn't been captured yet. Like if everything you do can be captured, then the ability to have this ever creativity is really important. And basically, I think there are limits to your creativity without environments like this. Because environments like this, you have ideas you never had before. You develop and think in new ways. You encounter new kind of, new fears and anxieties, different things. And I find that the online record on YouTube or writings that I've done actually puts stuff in me to improvise with, helps me review to figure out how to be a better artist of myself. in the art of living. And so there really is something ontological about all this data being made. Now, I know there's an additional conversation about Web 3.0, decentralized data, et cetera, so forth. I know that's a conversation that can be brought up. But I guess I want to say that there's reasons to be hopeful in the fact that all of our data is online and it's being quote unquote captured, because we can then use it as a historical record of ourselves from which we can become better artists of ourselves because we have better material of ourselves to work. More there's stuff online to send signals and meet new people, right? So I appreciate your comment. Thank you for sharing it.
Beautiful. Well, Claudia.
Thank you, Artem. Nice to meet you. Hi, Daniel, and hello, everyone else. So belonging is really dear to me. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a psychotherapist for 30 years working with couples, and I've written a book on belonging, outlining a path to belonging. I'm just telling you that because what I'm about to say is informed by my observation that there's a difference between talking about belonging and actually living it out. And so when Kevin came forward and said, I don't know how to enter in here, at least that's the way it landed for me. I could kind of identify with that. And then we quickly moved on to more ideas about belonging. And I think there was a lost opportunity for us to actually live through some of the very things that we are concerned about here during the last 90 minutes. And I guess I just wanted to bring that forward because I think we're at a precipice in history where we have to learn how to bridge our differences. So in this space right now, we've been belonging to ideas, and that's a really important piece. And I'm really grateful to you, Daniel and Artem, for bringing these ideas for us to really play with. And in addition to that, I'd like to know, I'm going to be leaving this meeting wondering, how did Kevin feel? Did he, he's resilient enough. He was able to meet us or you guys in idea space. But I guess I'd like to also just point out that we've got to find other ways to find connection. And one way that I've found is through small groups. I've got an international community where we get together in what's called wisdom circles. So that's changing structure, but really what it is changing process. It's the how turning into the what. So I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, no, I think it becomes extremely important to move from ideas. I guess for me, one of the reasons why I experience this space or this sort of conversation different from podcasts is because for me, there's a deep emotional experience. Like, I don't know what you're going to say. I don't know what Kevin's going to say. I don't know if what I'm saying is going to land. I don't know if what I'm saying is even valuable. Maybe crazy. Maybe all these ideas don't add up. You've poured all these years into these work, and maybe it's not even helpful to anyone at all. Maybe there's also something where I should just go find people who I know, say, like philosophy, or they've read Philip Reef, and just talk with those people and find belonging with those people. But that actually would be completely part of the problem, is because you're not actually being brought to a place where you emotionally have to change. I definitely think there are limits. Like, I don't think you can just do the social coordination mechanism like we're talking about and that be enough. I think for me, this is a place where ideas can be had with other people that are uniquely embodied and emotional that you need to go through in order to be able to handle hearing difference or ideas you don't like and not knee-jerking or pulling away. I think that ultimately this can gradually and slowly habituate yourself to a new relationship with ideas that actually beg the ideas to be brought into your life and into other people, because you're meeting people and then you want to bring them into your lived experience. So for me, like, again, I think one of the reasons why the podcast or the lecture format of engagement has been so popular in history is because it brings with it a certain authority. It brings with it the students aren't going to talk back to you. And then it becomes easy to just be a head on a stick and to kind of put your ideas over other people. Where in this environment, you have no idea. And so that brings, for me, certainly a felt sense that I find really, really invaluable, because even just the point you're making right there, like Claudia, which is completely important, it makes me reflect on myself. Am I adequately bringing belonging into my own life? Am I actually doing it? Maybe not. And I have to think about that, and I have to wrestle about that. Oh, and I'm full of self-deception and, convincing myself that are not true. So I'm going to be a master at making myself believe that I'm engaged in real belonging when I'm not, if I'm not regularly running into and encountering people to remind me of that, because that's what I'm prone to do. And so having spaces where I can have people make statements like you made, or Kevin made, or comments, is actually invaluable for me, or I'm doomed. I'm doomed to simply be someone who ends up talking about belonging without having any lived experience of belonging, without actually going into places where it can be something beyond just words. So I appreciate what you shared and what Kevin shared in this space.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that in also, Claudia. And, I think what comes up for me is there's always a limitation with any kind of medium or any kind of thing. Like even like I see this as an advancement or from the one-on-one podcast. And there's limitations, like you brought up. Well, how does Kevin feel? Right? It's like there can be a capacity to do that, and there's ways of interacting, like you said, in one-on-one work or small group work. Right? Small group work. There's way more of this kind of attunement and a focus on relationality. How are we relating to each other? I've been doing relational practice for about 4 years now, circling relatefulness, for those that are familiar. And there's way more emphasis on how do people feel, right? And it is very different than more of like an intellectual or philosophical conversation. And for me, I see there being a role in all these modalities and all these mediums, and being able to kind of dynamically move through them. Because there's something where I can just get stuck in the relational practice, right? And I get just stuck on feelings and like, how does everybody feel? In the same way I could get stuck in kind of the podcast or intellectual space and just get stuck in ideas. So I kind of see there, it's necessary to have kind of this dynamic way of moving through these spaces and realizing that they all have limitations.
I think the main thing is we're being called to integrate both to the best of our ability in any given time. So I hope you don't hear this as a criticism per se, but just a little bit of feedback. That's what appreciating differences is really all about, isn't it? It's how we grow. It's because we don't have the whole full picture. Somebody's going to illuminate our blind spots. So yeah. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share that.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing your voice in. Yeah, I don't know if Kevin wanted to say. I was like, Kevin, how is your sense of belonging since Claudia's bringing this up? I see you commented. I'm
feeling good, but all those folks referencing me has made me feel like I belong.
Ah, beautiful. Well,
because I didn't want to put you on the spot either, Kevin. I was really just pointing to you, saying, "Me too." All right.
That's exactly how it was received.
Good.
Yeah, it was my sense when Kevin kind of came back and was having more of a interaction. I was like I kind of felt him closer or something, like he was moving in. And yeah, I could have checked, but that was my kind of sense. So I'm glad that's your experience, Kevin. Seth, what else do you have?
Well, I also resonate with sometimes I don't know what the limits are, and so I have to actually encounter them. So again, just this last exchange, it's kind of like, oh, we could take this one step further. And one thing that's actually, maybe we didn't do it here today, but I know it's happening at Limicon all the time and is happening often. With this technology, we have this thing called breakout rooms. So we could, right, if we all wanted to hang out for another hour, then we could break into rooms and we could come back. And I've been in online spaces like that. And what's really cool is when you come back to the main room, because then it's still the group, but everyone's had more opportunity both to speak and to listen. But I partly raised my hand to just see if I could get my second part of my first question about Eunoia, because I happen to know a little bit of the Eunoia story, but it's something that Daniel was involved in on the ground, so to speak. It was not online, and it was very much different meeting. And so anyway, I'm trying to bump the question I asked before and see if you might say something about that.
Well, that is fantastic. And I what I would say, and just as a quick comment, what I also think is part of the work is actually with this technology, inventing a great multiplicity of different ways of meeting that do different things at different times. Some focus on ideas, some focus on encountering bodies, some focus on music, live music. I was doing that with Rigel. I was just speaking with Alex Ebert on how there is a lack of environments, especially at scale, that are diverse in the kind of space they afford. Ebert was talking about how sometimes with his band, they would not have a set and how that created an entire different musical experience, right? Or he would change the song in the middle of it. And basically, there are perhaps countless new ways of I was struggling with this word, improvising improvisation with one another in terms of body, emotion, mind, that we've not really been able to coordinate or create well until this moment. And this is an age of great social technology experimentation, if you will, great linguistical experimentation, because the logistical demands of gathering have been lowered so dramatically. Now, in that lowering, you're going to lose something. You're going to lose that bodily presence. So there's going to be a demand on you to make that up. But you may actually learn through this to relate to ideas and emotions in a way that make you more motivated to learn your body. And then you actually also learn how to deal with your body in speaking, which is something many people can't handle. So they hear ideas they don't like and blow up because their nervous system goes crazy, right? So this is all an age of profound creation and experimentation in new spaces that allow us to improvise, to engage in different forms of improvisation, without which I'm not sure if we can fully develop as persons. So a kind of renaissance, I suppose, in these social technologies. But Eunoia is a Greek word that is loosely translated as beautiful thinking. It was an art gallery, venue, and performance space. That it was an old building. There was this old building they were going to tear down, and took it back and started building it up with Evan Hansen, Bernard Hankins. We had, we had open mics every Thursday for years and years. We had a meal just before that. If you're going to have a lot of people, soup is great. A lot of soup. Because you make that big pot. Really grand. We had Opera Viva perform there. Jeff did one of his plays. We did a cappella. Bernard and I did something called Cypher Tank, where we had a bunch of young children do the hip hop cipher because we thought it was a supreme think tank. So we did that for brand making and ideas and different things. That was really cool, and it empowered these kids because they're like, wow, I'm actually super creative. So we did all these different things. A lot. The reason why this space was extremely, I guess I grew up in diners as well. I've mentioned this before, just sitting with the old gentleman every Friday before the fish fry. And I guess I want to say that the overarching thread between many things, I'm happy to go into any great detail on Eunoia, is I suppose I constantly experience the power of spaces that bring people together who don't know what's going to happen or why they're coming together. Like when you get people who come together without a preset plan, but they have a certain faith in the possibility of that space, you certainly can have certain magics, right? Like so we would do all sorts of things. Like, a secret to get people to come into your spaces, just do whatever work you need to do outside on the stoop. You just sit outside on the stoop working on your laptop. People just walk up and like, what's going on? You're like, we're just working. They think it's a festival. So just being outside, having the doors open, like doing all of this stuff that basically says, come on in. So you architecturally and by design send all the signals you possibly can that says, come on in, have dinner, okay, potluck, heck yeah. So basically, whenever it's nice outside, eat outside. Everyone can see it. Everyone can see it. People across the street, because it was kind of in the middle of, there's a road going by and traffic, and we had the universe. People walk by and be like, what's going on? So you get outside, it says people come on in. And when people feel like they can come on in, who you've never met before, the very fact they're actually willing to walk up to people at a table says something about their personality and creates various openness. So the question of, maybe we can have a whole story time on that. But I will say a lot of the through line, I guess, for my life has been the importance of doing things that say to people without saying directly, but indirectly by the design of the space, et cetera, so forth, come on in. And how if you do that well, and then you also have people of whom are able to improvise, improvisation like music, with whoever comes on in, you put those things together, then that becomes a microcosm, a kind of a picture of what it would mean to belong again. And this technology is a way to spread that versus scale it, because if you scale something, you change its quality and lose it. And I think at the end of the day, if the average person on this planet felt like there was some potluck they could just show up at every Thursday and see kind of the same people, because we also didn't really market. People just knew Thursday was open mic day. They just knew it was like a freaking holiday. If you do something regularly, every day, it becomes a holiday for people. Like if it's every Thursday at 5, they just wake up and go, it's open mic day, it's potluck day. They are thrilled. And you start seeing that enchantment that Charles Taylor said we lost. You start seeing that return to a feeling of meaning and belonging that people don't believe it's possible anymore, because it's open mic day, because it's the potluck day. It's because the cipher tank is going on. And that feeling of regularity and an open-ended possibility with people you've never met before, of whom will feel like you've known all your life, that creates a feeling of belonging again. That certainly gets people out of bed in the morning. It makes them happy to be walking your way to see what's in the soup.
I love that. Soup and eating outside. It makes me wonder if there's any evidence of there being outdoor seating at restaurants, like that actually bringing more people in. That would be an interesting thing to look at.
Everyone should read that Christopher Alexander, the language pattern, like architecture. Those people are a big deal for our age today, in my opinion.
Yeah, I keep hearing that name. That's definitely Christopher Alexander. He's an architect, and his work is on my to read list. But I think it's like a 5-volume, like one of those gigantic kind of things. But it keeps coming up. He keeps coming up. So I'm gonna follow that synchronicity there. Yeah, this has been so fascinating, and I imagine we could keep going for like another hour. But I'm sure people have other things they need to do. I know I need to take care of myself because I've been sick for like a week, and this is pretty difficult what I'm navigating. But
first thing, I wish I had that chicken noodle soup. Good. Dang it. It was Thursday.
Yeah, chicken noodle, butternut squash, any kind of soup will do right now, for sure. I do, maybe I could ask one more question and we could end off on this. And this, you brought up Philip Reef early in the conversation. That's clearly somebody whose work has played an influential role in the Belonging Again series. And, just to kind of reiterate, my understanding of him is that his central argument is that Western culture replaced sacred order with the therapeutic, so kind of a cultural mode organized entirely around the self's need for fulfillment and psychological well-being. Where once culture asked what is demanded of me, and now asks what do I need to feel whole. And in that shift, the therapists replaced the priest, and authenticity replaced obedience, and the ground beneath belonging quietly disappeared. And Reef's own life bore the weight of this diagnosis, most painfully in his marriage to Susan Sontag, who went on to kind of embody exactly the liberated therapeutic culture that Reef spent his career critiquing. And, it's a wound he never recovered from and never resolved, leaving him as a clear example of a man who can explain the problem, but couldn't address it in himself. So with that said, are there dimensions of Belonging Again where you feel you're in the same position where you can explain something that you haven't yet addressed in yourself?
Oh, I couldn't explain anything about spaces like this and interacting with people or Eunoia or different things. That's one of the reasons we do this, is because I don't, I cannot be my own address. I need Michelle. I need the kids. I need that wholesale where I'm, running into people that have nothing to do with philosophy. Like we can't do it. Like the tragedy of Philip Reeve, and there are other thinkers, there's basically, well, you could say the tragedy of our political moment that can identify the problem but can't do anything about it. Because we're all doomed for tragedy without a new social coordination. We're all without new medium conditions. There's no amount of willpower that can make you. There's no amount of willpower or intelligence or insight that can make you avoid the ultimate victory of your own frenemy brain that wants to convince you that you're on the right path as you descend deeper into the place you don't want to go. And so for me, that becomes the importance of regularly being in spaces like this to help keep checking yourself, to form new habits, to keep developing. Like I keep, all the times I thought something was wrong or this idea was wrong, only to meet someone that made me go, maybe I'm wrong, that I would have never thought of had I not been in spaces to encounter that revelation. One of the great problem of human beings is tied to a problem I like to call true ignorance. It's one thing to know you don't know something. It's entirely something else to not know you don't know something. Because you know what it's like to not know you don't know something? Feels like knowing something. Kathy Schultz makes that point. It's exactly right. So we're in huge trouble because the main thing that ruins our lives is often not the thing we know we don't know, but the thing we don't know we don't know. That black swan, that unknown. Well, how do you deal with that? Regular spaces of otherness, regular spaces of surprise and encounter where people say things to you that remind you of things, that make you think things you wouldn't have thought before. So my life is doomed for tragedy unless I, have places like this, unless I have Michelle, unless I have communities where people are coming together and interacting with one another. I'm pretty doomed. So I'm glad you're all here to help me not be so doomed. I really appreciate it. And we'll just keep on doing the work of avoiding that doom, of which, if we do, found in that space of lack, can be one that opens up for beauty.
Beautiful. Well said. And if anybody wants to continue having this conversation, I've just pasted the link to Castalia, and I think that's the platform where others are thinking about gathering to continue this conversation. But yeah, I just want to thank everybody for showing up. I really appreciated this, and thank you so much, Daniel. I think that you're a gem, and I think that hopefully this was enough of an introduction where people can feel that there's that it would be worth it to dive deeper in your work, and it's definitely it's been fruitful for me, and I look forward to reading more of your stuff. Thank you so much.
You are, gentlemen. I have had a complete blast. Thank all of you. I've really enjoyed it. Dinner's usually at 5. Well, if it's Thursday, we have soup. So if you ever buy the porch in Virginia, and I'm now going to go try to blow up balloons. I couldn't find any pre-blown ones, so I'm going to, my lungs are going to give out, blowing up. I just need to do 5. Reed really likes balloons. So wish me the best of luck in this undertaking. And thank you so much for this. And like I said, I turned in taxes. I'm free. I'm freaking free. I'm done. So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you all.
What a beautiful day. And happy birthday to your son, Daniel.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Best to you all. Thank you so much.
Take care.